Mark. This is our first YA Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about the book Unwind by Neal Shusterman, and joining me today is my good friend John Pasha. So today we're talking about Unwind, as I said, and it's basically a dystopian novel about there was a war between people who were pro-life and pro-choice, and the pro-lifers won. So basically, in this world, if somebody becomes pregnant, they must have the baby. However, once a teenager reaches a certain age, they can be retroactively unwound if their parent so wishes, which does not seem ideal for the teenagers who are chosen to be taken apart. So we're going to have some questions. If you are interested in this book, be aware that we're going to talk about some things that might be considered spoilers. So if you want, go ahead and read the book first and then come back to this video. However, if you've already read the book, feel free to stay. You can find the book on Kindle, on Amazon, at your library, in bookstores. It's everywhere. So without further ado, John?
I think we should first discuss, one of the big questions that we talked about in previous times as to whether or not you feel this book is either predominantly from a pro-life viewpoint or a pro-choice viewpoint. And it's interesting that you said that the pro-life forces won in the book, because I believe officially wasn't that they were like, it wasn't really one, there's like a stalemate in between.
Yeah, there was like a peace treaty. I guess they didn't really win.
Yeah, but no, that's a very interesting point because, do you feel that the book comes at the issue from perhaps not an overtly pro-life angle, but a pro-life slant, or what do you feel? What do you feel the book's message is? Do you think it's one way or the other? What do you think?
Well, I personally thought that the book actually had a more pro-choice slant, which I found interesting because I know when we discussed this before, we said that there was stuff online that said it was actually a lot of people found it to be the other way.
Mm-hmm.
But I personally found it to be kind of pro-choice because it seemed to be saying, look what happens when these choices are made for people. Mm-hmm. They end up having this option actually to destroy their children, whereas if they had the choice in the beginning, they might not have to make such a terrible choice later on.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, the fetus is not alive until a certain point. Mm-hmm. And so there's a big difference between doing that and straight up murdering somebody.
Mm-hmm. Unwinding a teenager who has experienced life for 13. I think they begin from 13 to 18 is the unwind period, or 13 to 17.
Right, and I guess an important point to bring up also is that all the pieces of the person must be used.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the treaty. They have to go to other people. So I guess if somebody loses their arm, then they'll get an arm that was unwound from a teenager, which is terrifying. So
well, it's very interesting how they've advanced technology. They say it's in the near future, but yet it's in a future where iPods are in the antique store. So let's say roughly about 50 years or so in the future. We think now 1950s is kind of antique or so. So at that point in time, technology is so advanced that doctors can give you a new arm that's completely working, but yet there's still no single payer in dystopian United States. Go figure, 100 years later, and the United States still doesn't have single payer, but that's, it's my politics leaking through. But,
yeah, so the pro-choice, pro-life debate is interesting because I actually hadn't thought of that, which is really embarrassing, but I actually hadn't thought of it when I was reading the book for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go back and think about it, it is kind of scary because they do kind of go into the whole fear-mongering aspect, and they have ads, what could be real ads, like political ads for these unwinding camps where the kids go before they're unwound. And it does, I was saying to one of my other friends who read this book, it does seem like something that theoretically could happen, which I guess does actually make for good sci-fi.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really interesting because when I read this book, I took at it from a different angle. I felt that the book had a very pro-life bent to it, or at least it was trying to be neutral, but through the course of being neutral, it ended up being pro-life just from the different events occurring. So I did pull out some sections here in my notes. There was a treaty, like you said, the Treaty of Life, where the pro-life forces and the pro-choice forces came together, and they said, "Oh, okay, we don't want to continue the second Civil War in the United States. So, as a compromise, life begins at conception. Abortion is illegal. So already we have the pro-life." If you could think of a checklist, the pro-life, goals have been met. But in exchange, you could unwind your teenagers from age 13 to 17. Well, pause. The pro-choice forces aren't advocating for that. That doesn't seem like a benefit for the pro-choice camp. We already have the pro-life camp having their aims met. Abortion's illegal and life begins at conception. But the question I have is, why would the pro-choice soldiers or the people in the camp, why would they agree to a peace treaty of which none of their aims are met? It seems like the debate is being interpreted as pro-life and anti-life. Because if you were in the anti-life camp, sure, yeah, unwind those teenagers, send them into the unwind camps and we can take their organs. So if you're anti-life, sure, that would fit that aim. But it seems like they were, and I'm not saying this is intentional, but it seems like they were strawmanning the pro-choice argument into the people in the pro-choice want abortions. They the second they get pregnant, it's off to the abortion mill. And that's not what people who are pro-choice fight for. I have a quote from the Admiral on page 223, which said, he said, "On one side, people were murdering abortion doctors to protect the right to life," and that does happen in our now everyday, in our current day, and I do have some facts after this. And he continues, "While on the other side, people were getting pregnant just to sell their fetal tissue." Well, now wait a minute. On the one hand, many pro-life forces do bomb abortion clinics or threaten them. But on the other hand, people who are pro-choice don't get pregnant just to sell their fetal tissue. They don't get abortions for the LOLs. So it seems like the dichotomy presented here isn't evenly balanced. And the Admiral later on goes on to say, at first it was a joke. This is the peace treaty for the unwinding. No one intended it to be taken seriously. Well, wait a minute. If that's the case, then what did the pro-choice faction gain from this peace treaty? Because in the text, it does not say pro-life has won outright. It might be, and that's why it was interesting that you said that, because it seems like they did win, because all of their goals have been achieved, or have they've succeeded in getting what they wanted. And the pro-choice people have gotten diddly squat. So the question is, if both sides were at an impasse, and they needed to create a compromise in order to stop the war, because the war was dragging on and no one was winning and everyone was kind of tired. Well, why did the pro-choice faction agree to this treaty when in reality they gained nothing? I talked about some facts with the bombing of abortion clinics. According to the NAF, the National Abortion Federation, in the early 1990s, anti-abortion extremists concluded that murdering providers was the only way to stop abortion. The first provider murdered was in 1993. Including the 2015 attack in Colorado, there have been 11 murders and 26 attempted murders due to anti-abortion violence. Several of the doctors were attacked in their homes. There have been 229 bombings or arsons since 1976, 61 butyric acid attacks since 1993, and 654 anthrax threats sent to abortion clinics since 1990s. So what the Admiral said in the previous quote about pro-life people were attacking abortion clinics, that's true. That is happening right now in our daily lives. But the alternative isn't happening. So I fear that in order to present this argument as both sides have their problems, we needed to come and do a compromise, both sides need to come to the issue, they had to scapegoat the pro-choice faction, because what can you say bad about the pro-choice faction? They want women to control what goes on in their body? Darn them. Darn them for wanting body autonomy. How dare they?
But on the other hand, with this book, it seems that it does kind of give the pro-choicers a little bit where it does seem to be kind of showcasing the hypocrisy, I guess, of being so one-track minded on either side. And because, like you said, the pro-lifers they got what they wanted, but they're okay with unwinding, and that because supposedly the person doesn't die, and that gets into some other like crazy things, but that to me is completely hypocritical. And I think that the point of the book is to kind of show that even if you get what you want, there's going to be problems, there's going to be hypocrisy, and there's no way to make everybody happy. And if you do try to do that, if you try to only go one way and not think about any of the other issues involved, you'll end up with this horrible reality that is just screwing everything up.
Yeah, no, I agree. My only fear is that I think because a lot of review websites, because as we said before, this book is on a lot of Christian school reading lists, which is great. It goes out to a variety of audiences, but when it is presented to those audiences, it almost seems as if it's like, and here is a great book about what happens when the evil of abortion goes to the next logical step. First it's abortion, then it's unwinding. And in the book, unwinding is presented as such an evil thing that all the characters don't like it. Connor, Riza, Levi eventually goes against it. All of these characters are against unwinding, and then you experience an unwinding through the character of Ronald, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And the terrible fear that you have as you hear the bones crunching and the saws, zhizhing, and then the doctor like, there, dear, so how was your day? And it's like, excuse me. And you can make the connection, and they often do, the pro-life people who are reading this book, that, unwinding is equal to abortion, hence abortion is bad because it's obvious unwinding is bad. Whereas, but I do agree, there is a way to interpret it as from the point of view of a pro-choice. So storking, which is something that occurs in the novel where if you have a child and you don't want it, you can leave it at the doorstep of your neighbor or someone that you know, and if you don't get caught, by law they have to take care of it. And there was one example where a child got storked so many times that it ended up at the original home half dead. So then you can see, we'll look at the hypocrisy of people who are pro-life. They are so pro-life, but yet they're not willing to take care of this child. But that requires some reflection and thought and philosophy involved with, this is what the book is saying and here are underlying messages. Compare that to a more obvious, in-your-face, abortion equals unwind, abortion bad because unwind is bad. It seems like while it can be, in my opinion, it can be interpreted as there being pro-life criticisms in the text, it seems like those can easily be read over or not as apparent compared to a pro-choice criticism where they view abortion as unwinding.
Okay, let's just quickly talk about the characters.
Okay,
we have a series of main characters. This book goes from point of view to point of view. We have Connor, who is a typical teenage screw-up type person who is scheduled to be unwound by his parents. Risa, who is an orphanage child, who's going to be unwound because she hasn't been adopted. Love, who is a religious tithe who wants to be unwound because of religious reasons. And Roland, who I guess he's a bully, he didn't have a ton of development, but they all end up together and trying to escape being unwound. Did you feel that they were realistically representative of teenagers?
I'm very glad you asked that, because I didn't mind the other characters. I thought Connor was fine. His relationship with Riza kind of appeared out of nowhere. I thought it was kind of one of those, we need to have a romance in here somewhere, so it was kind of shoehorned in. But it was fine. It wasn't distracting, or it wasn't bothersome. At first, Lev, who goes also by Levi too? Or
I think it's just Lev.
It's just Lev. Lev, I didn't like that character at first. But when he came back radicalized, then I thought, oh, okay, this is getting good. And interestingly enough, that space in between where he leaves sci-fi and then he appears at the clinic or wherever, that was, I think the author wrote like a short story or a short something where it explains.
Yes. And the short story actually is called Unstrung, and it can be found on ebook, I think, and it's very good, and I would recommend it because this is a series. So if you want to go on and read the series, I would recommend you read the short story as well.
But yeah, I liked him when he came back, because it seemed like, I don't know, the character was just, there was something about it that was just so much more interesting, whereas at first it was, and maybe it was because he was kind of brainwashed by his religion and the whole idea of, we had 10 kids and the 10th one we're going to sacrifice because Christianity has co-opted unwinding in its own ways. But for Roland, I actually didn't like that character. I felt that he was very kind of one-dimensional. Like, we already have enough enemies in this book. Society is the enemy because it's looking to unwind teenagers. The Admiral maybe is an enemy because we're not sure where his alliances are. But then here comes Roland, and he's kind of the stereotypical enemy. Of course he attempts to rape Risa. Of course he betrays them at the end when they're at the facility. Of course he is consistently antagonistic and scheming. And then by the time he gets unwound, I don't feel sympathetic towards him. I'm like, oh well, bye-bye, Roland. I felt that if they had portrayed him as, like, okay, he doesn't like Connor, and he doesn't get along with him, but ultimately the main enemy isn't Connor, but the society of which they live in, which forces them to go against each other, I think it would have been a bit more nuanced. I think Roland was just a villain put in there just to kind of move the story along.
Mm-hmm. And Roland, I think he is also a vehicle, because, well, I guess this gets into later books, but we won't talk about those. But Roland I think it almost serves as a vehicle just to show unwinding, the process of unwinding, which, by the way, is terrifying and gave me nightmares.
There's this really good YouTube video which they have. Well, it is of unwinding, but someone did like their interpretation of the scene. They did it with a much more sympathetic girl, I think.
Oh, I've never seen that actually.
Yeah, I showed it to my cousin. She was traumatized too, but I just wish the unwinding. I don't wish this, but I wish the unwinding happened to a character that we actually liked, because then it would have hit us harder rather than, oh, there's the main enemy, he's getting unwound.
And I actually, with Lev was actually my favorite character, so that was kind of funny. But I originally, for some reason, I thought he was Jewish.
Interesting.
And I don't know why I thought that. It might just be because his name is Levi. But I thought he was Jewish, and then like halfway through the book, I was like, no, he's not Jewish. But in my head, it had already kind of cemented that, so he's Jewish to me.
Yeah, it's okay. I had canoned him as Indian for some reason, and I don't know why, because he's described as blonde-haired, blue-eyed, but an Indian Catholic. But anyways.
But I think it is interesting that, especially, this book came out at least a few years ago. I'm not entirely sure when it came out, but it's very interesting for readers now, because, especially dealing with ISIS and all of our country being completely divided right now, and Lev does come back radicalized, and this is shown as a good thing. I'm not saying I'm not saying that radicalization
terrorism is bad, people. Just gotta be sure.
But it does show that young people particularly are susceptible to this, especially when the country is divided. Like ours is right now, and their future is completely divided. Still, it's not like what unwinding is legal, guess that's it. Guess
Yeah.
you know, there's still people
Time to deal with it.
there's still people
Yeah.
who are completely against it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just alright, so we're almost out of time, so just to wrap up, what would you like some closing remarks?
Or
question?
Well, I mean, this question we won't have enough time to discuss, but quickly, what do you think? And I think we discussed this a little bit in previous conversations. What do you think about the politics involved in the story? Meaning, from disability, when Risa says, "Oh, people can't unwind people who are disabled, so I'm all set," and it's like, okay, well, what qualifies as disabled? Is it like if you have a learning disability, does the state have an incentive not to test you because then they could sell you for parts? The politics behind LGBT representation. There was a quote from the author's Tumblr where someone asked him, will you be including LGBT characters in there? And he said, when I introduce LGBT characters, I try not to make it an issue. I try to make it just a normal part of life, which it is, which is nice and everything, but there aren't really any LGBT characters in Unwind other than Sci-Fi's dads, which appear in one page. And he said, what was that character? Mitchell? Something like that? The rich character? The guy who's... Anyways, one of the characters, he said he may or may not be gay, which I thought was kind of unusual. But, yeah, so...
Well, I think a lot of times with writing, the author has an idea of how the characters are going to be already, and it's not going to be like, this one, I'll just make a gay person and stick it in there. I mean, I understand that it would be interesting to have more representation in sci-fi literature, but at the same time, you don't want it to feel shoehorned in.
Sure, absolutely.
As for the disability thing, that's a little more difficult. I do wish that he had delved into that a little bit more, but I guess, you want to keep the story going.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely, especially since, what's stopping someone from, just saying, getting the person and kind of shoving them off into the corner, and it's like, okay, now this person is no longer a burden of the state, or, I mean, it's
and
very...
what does qualify as handicapped? I mean, that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Are you going to go, throw yourself off a bridge so that you cripple yourself, so
Yeah.
you're not going to be unwound? Or
Yeah, but then that being said, what accountability is there for someone not unwinding you? Like, they're going to sit there and be like, aha, you can't unwind him because he is paraplegic. And it's like, all right, well, who's going to stop me? The law says so, sure, but this is a society which authorizes the decommissioning of teenagers, And then, it's really interesting the age range that they selected from 13 to 17, because that is the point in time in most people where puberty is happening and people come out. So, maybe this is Mike May's crazy thinking, but the people who are willing to unwind, if you come out and it's like, Mom and Dad, I'm an atheist, Mom and Dad, I'm gay, and it's like, all right, well, to the unwind factory for you, I thought it would have been a little bit more interesting with the identity politics and how unwinding as a system prevents certain people from being true to themselves, in a world that doesn't have single payer, and in a world that authorizes unwinding, and in a world where abortion of all things led to the second Civil War, I can't imagine gay rights and disability rights and women rights have advanced much, if not backslided. So it would have been interesting, even from a race angle. We bring up the movie, not The Grudge, the Purge, where it's revealed in the second movie that the Purge was instituted not primarily, but kind of secondarily, to get rid of the homeless people and the minorities, and that's how crime and unemployment are down. Well, if people who are wards of the state and burdens to the state and people who are just kind of not acceptable to society's standards, I can see unwinding being weaponized and used as a tool against people of color, people who have low socioeconomic status, the undesirables in society, especially if it's coupled with religion. The religious right, not only getting rid of abortion, but then getting rid of the undesirable minorities, they'd have a field day.
Yeah.
So
it would be really interesting to link that sort of thing to you know, the issues that we face every day with, you know, the poor and the homeless and, you know, people dying because they don't have water in Michigan and just like anything like that.
Absolutely.
So to wrap up, I would say I enjoyed this book a lot, even though it scared me. And I love sci-fi, and I think that it was indicative of good sci-fi that you
the genre,
feel,
not the character.
Yes, the genre. There's a character named
There's a
sci-fi,
character named sci-fi, yeah.
no, science fiction. The genre that you really feel that this could happen, and you feel that you need to take some kind of action against this thing that's not even happening. Would you say you enjoyed this book?
Absolutely. You know, even though I had criticisms, I always nitpick things, so it's just natural for me. But I did very much enjoy this book. I thought that it was well written. The characters were believable for the most part. And it was a book that you probably would be unwilling to put down once you get into it. It's a book that you, yeah, it's a book that you really want to see what happens at the end. I will say though, it is a book that I felt complete with on its own. I didn't really feel, I mean, it's great that there's more of it, but I didn't really feel that there was like a cliffhanger or anything at the end to be like, oh yeah, there's definitely going to be a number 2. So if you guys, you know, don't have time to read an entire series, you are more than welcome or able or whatever to read just Unwind by itself, because it's a standalone book. So I recommend it.
So again, this book was Unwind. It's called, it was written by Neal Shusterman. You can find it on Amazon, in the library, Barnes & Noble, wherever you find your books. It's part of a series. There's, I think, 3 more, and a short story.
Unwind, Unholy, and Unsold.
Yes. But like John said, it does actually stand up on its own as a single book, so if you are not a series type person, I would really recommend at least reading the first one. If you have your own opinions about this, go ahead and leave it in the comments. You can follow me at lionessgoddess.com, at lionessgoddess on twitter.com, and everything about that I will put in the description of this video. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for visiting our first YA Wednesday. Next week we will be discussing Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. I'm Anna Mansager, and this is John Pasha. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.